Hi, everyone. This is not the actual original live keynote presentation that I did, but because some people have asked for it, I am going to record it so that others can see it who weren't able to make the annual meeting. So the keynote was entitled Unapologetically Disruptive, Challenging the Status Quo. And it is a demonstration, not a how-to. It's nothing in depth, but it's a demonstration on some application of disruptive thought leadership. So we went over a quick about me, and then we went over the history and to current of centers, HCBS and 14C in Tennessee, and then a demonstration of what became a housing battle, and then ended with some next steps in the present situations. The image here on the right is really about what we're all taught as little girls of the sugar and spice and to be nice and to be sweet, but disruptive, right? Disruptive, what is it? And a lot of times it has a negative connotation to it, but it isn't anything negative. Disruptive challenges the status quo instead of just going along with the rules. It targets unmet needs, and that's very specific with any type of disruptive leadership. You're really serving those that are underserved. It fills gaps in representation, whereas opposed to some other models might be looking to service the most amount of people possible. But this is really looking for where those gaps are and how to fill the gaps in that representation. And then finally, disruptive thought leadership really focuses on quality frameworks, quality focused frameworks. And that is in contrast to hard and fast rules, hard lines. Frameworks allow for situational adjustments. So a little bit about me. I am the third generation that is working in the field of developmental disabilities, lifelong advocate. I'm a sibling of somebody with developmental disabilities, the mother to a daughter with profound autism and SYNGAP1 and all the myriad of co-occurring disorders that come along with that. And I'm also a self-advocate, brain tumor survivor. I currently serve as the policy director for the National Council on Severe Autism. I volunteer as the patient advocacy director for the SYNGAP Research Fund, and I was formerly development director for a veterans 501c3 aimed at reducing veteran suicide. I have these QR codes throughout this presentation for you to be able to click and see more information, but that one there will go to my LinkedIn profile. So this is my lived experience, right? And this picture up here starts with my mom's family, her siblings. My mom was the oldest, like I was. And the second oldest was her brother, who also had developmental disabilities. Next in line was my Aunt Debbie, who is my godmother. And then my Uncle Jeff here was the baby. And he is the only one that ended up not having that intersection in his life with developmental disabilities as he got older. And then there's younger little Jackie. And this is my brother with a developmental disability and also my adorable little redheaded baby brother. This is my brother as an adult, and this picture here is really special to us because it was the first time that he was able to drive after rehabbing and spending almost a year in the nursing home rehabbing after anoxic brain injury and having to relearn to walk and all those kinds of things. So as a sibling, my brother, he's currently actually quite independent, living on his own and just really doing well. But there were periods throughout our adult life where I also had to take on the caregiver role for my brother also. My mom is the rock, and she taught me so much in my life about advocacy. She really is an extraordinary woman. She worked in the old developmental hospitals in our old state that we're originally from. And so did her mom. This is my grandmother and my Aunt Debbie. They all worked there, as well as my stepdad and my grandfather. Pretty much the entire town worked in the old developmental centers. So I grew up in them, right? But I grew up in ones that were very different than the type that Tennessee had. The ones that my family all worked at ran very well. And it was really a loss to the community when they closed. And then finally, here's my daughter, and she is in one of her many hospital admissions in this photo, getting her EEG. And then me alongside, kind of looking matching with our headdresses. And this is me after brain surgery. I had a rare tumor and a craniotomy starting in 2019, followed by 5 subsequent surgeries after that. So let's start with centers, CBS, and 14C in the history in Tennessee. So back in 1995, Tennessee had a lawsuit filed by People First of ARC and the United States Department of Justice against Clover Bottom Developmental Center. Now, it's important to note for context that the centers in Tennessee were not like the ones that my family all worked at in a different state. These ones were, from what I can tell, reading through history and from accounts of others who experienced these places, that they were much more in alignment with Willowbrook. And we are talking really abhorrent, horrific abuses. And so that is what Tennessee knows of these types of developmental centers. So the lawsuit was quite lengthy. It lasted for 10 years. And in the middle of that, in 2010, they did close the Arlington Developmental Center. And then in 2015, they finally came to agreement, and the final residents were moved out of Clover Bottom Developmental Center. And at that time, they were told they were going to have all the same level of supports and services in homes and communities. And many of them moved into their own homes and had all the staffing and services that they needed. Some 2-to-1, some 3-to-1 staffing, 24/7 staffing, all kinds of different adjacent therapies. Others were moved into 4-person community homes that had ICF level of care, and they had enough of those homes for 150 person capacity. And at the time, Deborah Payne was the Tennessee DIDD commissioner, and she said that closing the last of the large institutions in Tennessee, as challenging and as difficult as it is, I believe will lead to be one of the best states in regards to services for people with disabilities. And so when we get into where we are now, I think it is important to note that I don't think it happened through nefarious intent. I believe that at some level, at least, that people really did feel like this was going to be a good thing, that this was going to be successful. But it is a cautionary tale for others who maybe haven't hit this area yet. Now, in less than a year later, in 2016, those great waivers that were providing everything that these individuals needed, they closed them for new enrollment for good. Now, there do still seem to remain, not seem to, there are still some that are on the old waiver, which is still managed by the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disability. And they still are able to receive day programs, they're still able to receive higher ratios of staffing. In fact, even when you have comparable staffing, like the same types of service, they have higher pay rates on the old waivers. And so all of that exists still for those that were enrolled prior to 2016. But in 2016, they closed that waiver and switched from a 1915 waiver, the original HCBS waivers, home and community-based services. I'm sorry, I didn't say what that acronym is. But they switched from that waiver to 1115 demonstration waiver called TennCare 2. And that waiver, important to note, was not and is not managed by the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. It is managed by TennCare MCOs. So it is very different. Right away, we could see some problems in the wording of the new waiver because the highlighted part here is allow individuals with more significant needs related to an intellectual or developmental disability to receive a more intensive level of services and supports. And that sounds wonderful. That's exactly what we need, right? Except that's not the end of the sentence. It says, in order to plan and achieve employment and integrated community living goals. That's the goal of those programs. And to become as independent as possible. Now, I don't have a problem with the term independent as possible because I do fully believe in that. However, that isn't the way that it's been translated in recent years. Instead, they believe that the goal is that for independence. And if somebody does not have the capacity for full functional independence, then they just don't get services. And so that's really disheartening how this has happened. In 2021, 5 years later, CMS approved TennCare 3, which is an adaptation. It was an amendment, mostly quite similar to TennCare 2, except it was mostly a change in the financing. And so in TennCare 3, also still an 1115A demonstration project, it uses budget neutrality structure bound by an aggregate cap. So there is a cost ceiling. It enables savings by the state to receive federal matching. And it gives states the ability to earn and reinvest shared savings when it underspends. So this almost becomes then an incentive not to provide the necessary services if they can manipulate the data in some kind of way, which we have a very difficult time accessing any kind of transparency or data through TennCare. Now, the way that this was sold to us, not that any of us loved it or agreed with it in the beginning, but the way that they were trying to sweeten the deal or try to keep us calm and like this is going to be a good thing was they told us that the shared savings would be able to reinvest into programs that would better serve the higher acuity population. But that isn't what the shared savings are being used for. We continue not to have any of the services we need for this high acuity population. And instead, they're doing things like they were the first in the nation to add early intervention till 5 instead of 3, even though most of those services are duplicative and available through EPSDT anyways. They sent 100 million diapers to people under 1, right? And that's wonderful. These are all great things, except we have adults who are, banging their heads on walls and biting chunks out of their arms and really severe, intense, challenging behaviors, unable to access their doctor's appointments, unable to access anything in their community, any kind of providers, and nothing is being done about that. So it's a priority issue for us. In 2022, Tennessee passed Senate Bill 2042, which eliminated 14C in Tennessee. It's important to note, again, day programs are not available in ECF choices. only those that are grandfathered into the old 1915 waiver are able to access those through their waiver programs. Even if somebody were to pay out of pocket that is on ECF to go to a day program there and they had ECF staffing, their ECF staffing would not be able to accompany them to a day program because it's, for whatever reason, antithetical to the ECF Choices program, which really just goes to show that this population of higher acuity needs was not included into the ECF waiver, which is their only option now, right? Then in 2023, we had what is somewhat of an unsolvable revolution, and we'll get into that in the next slide. But then now we're in 2024, and Tennessee sent letters to family members and conservators stating it was decommissioning state-run homes that currently house adults with ICF level of care. The state does deny that it plans to evict adults from the homes. This is really kind of an emerging topic, and we are continuing to follow it. But these homes are the homes back here that you'll recall in 2015 when they closed the last developmental center and put people in these homes and promised them that these would be their forever homes. Well, less than 10 years later, they're getting letters about decommissioning those homes to make room for the Department of Child Services crisis. So this is the unsolvable revolution, right? Now, I do think it's important for context to note that what I am going to be talking about over the next couple of slides is specifically about policy. This is in no way to disparage the character of either of these individuals. This is the commissioner, Brad Turner, and this is the deputy commissioner, Jordan Allen. But the content is very relevant of their statements and their policies and their beliefs about this population because of the catalyst that it had in activating the parent community. This was where the disruption really started. So in September of last year, the commissioner and the deputy commissioner were invited to Kentucky to discuss how great ECF was and how it had helped them clear the wait list and all these different things. And parents went really just off the walls with this. Now, I hadn't seen this, and instead, my Facebook Messenger, my email, my text, voicemail, everything kind of blew up when this came out. And it was a really lengthy hearing. It was like 2 hours long, but I kept hearing, why would they call them unsolvable? Did you hear what he said? And so I did listen to it, but this is a public post. It's still up. I didn't hide any of the names because it still is public, but I also just wanted to kind of affirm and echo some of what the parents were saying here. Their responses to this were pretty swift and severe. And one says, no service providers taking the job. How are you improving this inaction for the underserved, the ones with more complex needs? Another says, lack of providers, services without providers equals no services. There are families who have yet to experience this person-centeredness. And another said, wow, quote, innovation and person-centered services, end quote, is an interesting way to describe neglect and forced human trafficking because there's no support available. We've never had 1 hour of staff in our whole 4 years in ECF, but go off. So what she's talking about, forced human trafficking there, what she's talking about is that because there is no providers that can provide this level of service, even if you have the waiver, because there are no day programs, because this is really just an abyss and a chasm, an empty waiver. then where does that care fall on? That care falls solely on the families. And because it falls on the families, they often either have to reduce or completely leave their careers. And the only, if they get anything at all, they get a stipend that is a max of $1,000 a month, which clearly is not enough to live on. And so that is what she is referring to there. So this is kind of my response to this when it all happened. I did end up responding to try to help the community work through some of their angst and anger. But I'm not going to play the whole thing. There is the QR code there, and I'm not sure it will come through on the recording. Hopefully it will. And I'm just going to play about 4 minutes of this.
Demographic of service has been thus far in our history as an industry unsolvable, the unsolvable, the unsolvable, the unsolvable.
The issue is not that she is unsolvable, that her level of care is unsolvable. The issue is that we are trying to fit everybody into a one-size-fits-all box.
There's not, aside from the intensity and unfortunately so often the intensity needed through an inpatient setting, long-term treatment options for people that are falling in that demographic are just overwhelmingly difficult.
This is a high level of training that is absolutely necessary, that isn't available right now.
Overwhelmingly difficult.
As I've been going through these suggestions over the past few days, there are only some of the ways that we can be more proactive and reduce the cost and quantity of out-of-state long-term inpatient placements. Parents like myself who have children who are eligible for those placements, this was recommended multiple times through the MCOs as an option for me to do with Jaden. I didn't do it, and instead I gave up a lot in order to keep her where she wants to be, home. Jordan had an interview with Janet Schaus in 2020 that he said that parents need to be responsible for the outcomes too. And ever since I read that article, all I could think was that we're the only ones being responsible for it. Every time we ask for something that this population needs in order to remain in their homes and communities, we're told no. And this just doesn't exist. And it's like, why? Why is the only option to live in perpetual poverty and live without the necessary supports, or to send to some very expensive out-of-state placement? Is that okay with the taxpayers? Are they aware that that's the choices that these families are being given? That many of these out-of-state far placements are essentially forced because these families are sitting on what are empty waivers. They're sitting on waivers that they can't access because those types of services are not meant for somebody who is chronically dependent. Okay, so what we just heard there, in case the audio didn't really come through, is that the deputy commissioner was talking about that this population is unsolvable, that he hasn't heard a good solution in 30 years, or that nobody has ever come up with a solution in his 30 years for this population, that it's just heartbreaking and it's tragic. And my response to it is that the parents do have the answers, that we're being ignored, that we're being told no, that not only do we have the answers, but we're verbalizing them, we're asking for them, we're going to the meetings, and we're always told no. So that was quite the disruption that had occurred last fall. But what it did is it really mobilized the community, parents who had felt just too overwhelmed. How will I ever put one more thing on my plate? How will I advocate? Or maybe they just didn't feel like their voice would make a difference, whatever it might be that had been keeping them kind of on the sidelines or the fence about advocating. They came out in full force after that. They were ready to share their stories and really discuss what their lived experience was, what their unmet needs were, and really engage in the process after that whole issue with the video. So we started hearing more and more from families about just how empty these waivers are and just how broken this ECF system was. And not just us, but all of the disability organizations in state were clearly seeing all these upset families where ECF was not working and their children were being segregated and isolated at home. So because 14C is closed and there's no day programs, and she can't even be eligible for exploration, which is just 30 days of a couple hours a week of them coming to see what kinds of jobs she might like. They have denied her even for that, let alone any kind of consideration that she would ever have competitive integrated employment, right? So because she can't do competitive integrated employment, what? She is supposed to do nothing and have no interaction with anybody ever. It's just so unacceptable. So the elimination of 14C, which by the way, I have yet to see that there is any study whatsoever that even one person who is on 14C is in competitive integrated employment. Now, I don't know that there has been any benefit to the individuals who needed the 14C waiver, like my daughter, that they now magically have access to competitive integrated employment. And even if there ever were to be somebody that they would find this unicorn that did somehow have 14C waiver and now is in competitive integrated employment, then it begs the question, why were they in the 14C waiver to begin with? Because this was never something that was forced. It was an option. If they had the option of competitive employment, why were they in 14C? 14C wasn't just about the wages. It was about meaningful daily activity. It was about having a sense of responsibility and purpose and social engagement and skill development and having the appropriate amount of support wrapped around you. She doesn't have access to that now. So it significantly altered our lives. I sold my house in the suburbs. I bought us a little farmstead. And that is what her current meaningful daily activity is. She's doing really well with her chickens and her bunnies, and she's learning value added products. And she really does love this environment. It has been very good for her. But again, all of that is my doing. These are not any services, any funding, anything that is coming from ECF to help me with this. This has been very costly and time consuming, and it's been a huge learning curve for me. I didn't know the first thing about farming, but no support comes from ECF for her to be able to do this. This is solely on the parents to try to find what it's going to look like when our adults graduate high school. What are they going to do with their days? So before we get into this, keep in mind everything I just told you, the big disruption that occurred last September, families getting really activated, more of the disability organizations in state being well aware of just this unrest that was going in the community. And I can say personally, I had reached out to every single one. I had had contact with every single one over the years. I have been very engaged and involved about these issues with ECF's waiver and it not servicing this population. And yet, none of the organizations have ever really made this their issue. A couple of times I've had a couple of the organizations have helped me on like one individualized project, right? One issue I might be having with an MCO at that particular time. And then that's it. And those are very helpful. And I've always been very grateful. I was never in any kind of way upset with the organizations that they weren't doing more. This housing battle was another huge disruption, which the ripples are still really kind of going to this day. So this occurred, and I want to say March is when I got brought into it. I had no idea this was going on. I had been very involved in my job, which is on the federal side. So I didn't have a lot of time or focus at all with this, whatever, anything that was going on in the state level at the time. But this was another event where all of my media, my email, my text, everything all blew up over a weekend. And at the time that I got brought into it, I didn't have very much time at all to do anything about it. I really wasn't sure I was going to be able to do anything about it. It had already gone through the health subcommittee in the House, and it was going to be going through the full health committee in just a couple days. And I knew nothing about this. I have a full write-up on this on the NCSA blog. You can see it. But the issue was that there was going to be new innovative housing projects. I mean, if ECF isn't working for us, okay, why would we be upset that there's new innovation coming to Tennessee, something we don't have already? The first was Gloriana, and it's an intergenerational interability place where aging caregivers can stay with their child with IDD and both receive the appropriate care that they need. So if I am caring for my daughter for the next 20, 30 years, and I reach a point in my life where I need assistive care, this would be a dream. This is a place that I could go with her. There wouldn't be that end of life separation that we see in like the documentary Mimi and Donna, right? And so what they were going to have is 4 Jack and Jill kind of pods within each house. And so it would be a total of 8 people, but it's really for kind of families, right? Because say my daughter would have her room, I would have my room, and a bathroom in the middle. That's our little pod. And there would be 4 sets of those within the house. And the second is Brightstone, which is 7 bedrooms, single occupant rooms, 6.5 baths. It's on a 140-acre property. It's high-tech learning center, equestrian center, horticulture, you name it. The place has it. It's beautiful. And the other thing is Brightstone's already they've had a day center, learning center that's highly acclaimed throughout the state. They've had that operating for decades now. And so each of these facilities were not asking the state for anything. They weren't asking the state for $1. This wasn't going to be an HCBS project. These are 501c3s that were funded and just wanted to open. So what is the issue? Well, the state code says that no more than 4 people with IDD could be per home, and that those buildings must be 500 yards apart. And remember, I said that the Brightstone was going to be kind of like a neighborhood community, and that Gloriana was going to have technically 8 per house, even though it's 4 families. So this was the code, and they weren't even asking to change the code, which had I brought in sooner, that would have probably been my approach. But they were simply asking for them to have an exception to this code so that they could do this project as a pilot. The state could see, hey, we can look at this. Is this working? And if this does work, then down the road, another 501c3, whatever, some other private company can follow along kind of what this pilots have done, and then they can go to the legislature and try to get another exemption, right? This didn't prohibit anybody else from ever having another exemption. It didn't change the code to broadly open this. It was just these two programs to try this. It was for the state to try this out to see if this is something that could work. And it's important to note that they did um, pay for and keep the Tennessee DIDD licensing. They agreed to all oversight. They even agreed to extra oversight through CQL, personal outcome measures monitoring. And yet there was this big opposition. Even after this did pass, the East Planning and Policy Council used to have lunch and learns every month, and they would invite people from the community, organizations from the community, anybody. It didn't have to be related specifically to DIDD, but any organization servicing this population, they would bring them on to 15 minutes for a webinar to talk about their program so that people in the community could be informed of what this is. It wasn't them promoting any particular organization or not. It was just information so families knew what was available out there. And so after all of this, they came, Brightstone was on one of those videos, one of those lunch and learns. And after that, all lunch and learns are canceled for the rest of the year. That video was never published. It was determined that they were not in alignment with DIDD values, but they were in alignment with DIDD values enough for DIDD to take their money for a license, right? To this day, there are still efforts working against these organizations, and it is really disheartening. As I said during my testimony, as I said during my advocacy throughout this whole issue, we do have real, actual, big problems in Tennessee, and this isn't one of them. And this is a distraction that anybody is investing any energy into trying to push away innovative solutions to Tennessee, especially when those solutions are not asking us for a single penny. So some of the opposition to 2497 was that we surveyed 1,000 people in 99 and pulled a home is what they wanted. Okay, but in 99, we didn't have the plethora of all the academic research we now have to determine what really are the factors in self-determination and how can we measure that. And it turns out that it really has nothing to do with having 4 people to a home. And so the academic research that we have supersedes this survey from just a small 1,000-person cohort back in 99 before we had any idea what HCBS really was going to be looking like. Another was that we have a history that's tough to get over. And I would agree with that. And I think that that's a lot of what the opposition really is about, is the history of Tennessee, is Clover Bottom, is Arlington Center, and what Tennessee experienced with those places, and understandably why they are so afraid. But that's not what these two places are. There's no reason to make any kind of equivalence to these two places. And I represent families across the nation, and especially in this state, who have a hard time getting through each day, right? So that's what we need to be focusing on. It could very well open us to an Olmstead violation. This one actually really was kind of quite infuriating to me because it was stated by somebody who I believe does know better, but certainly should know better. This has nothing to do with Olmstead. These were private 501c3s. This was not something that was going to be going through any kind of HCBS funding or anything like that. This was never going to be an Olmstead violation. And then the other was, this is my favorite. It's a shame NCSA just wants to warehouse people. Like, warehouse people, to go back to the beginning of this, when I talk about kind of my very robust lived experience, my entire life has rested in the intersection of marginalized populations and public policy. I began advocating when I was 8 years old, like publicly published advocating when I was 8 years old. I began lobbying when I was 14 years old. I've held various leadership positions across various organizations all throughout my adult life. To accuse me of all people of wanting to warehouse people was just goes to show you the absurdity in this. And what had made me feel just incensed and so betrayed was seeing how much energy the organizations were putting into fighting there being any other choice but ECF in the state. Meanwhile, where were they with the real segregation and isolation that was occurring for people like my daughter? Where were they when we couldn't, when we were on a wait list for 2 years for a placement 800 miles away and never could even get off that wait list? Where were they when every single hospital in the state denied her? When she couldn't go to school because she was so highly escalated, when we went a year without being able to find a psychiatrist in this state. I mean, I could go on forever about all of the failures along the way where people with high acuity behaviors that need more than just a couple of hours of ABA, you can just modify the behaviors and the behaviors go away. No, I'm talking about biologically based behaviors that are a symptom of their disability, that are lifelong, that they're going to be needing to have managed. Those individuals live a modernized institutionalization. They are segregated, they are isolated, they cannot leave their homes, they cannot go to their doctors, they cannot develop friendships and long-term meaningful relationships. They don't have access to build additional skills. This is a problem. This is what we all as advocates should be fighting, but instead they were fighting this. So I went and I testified. Now, I will say when I did get involved, all the organizations except one at least went neutral. They no longer were fighting the bill. One of the organizations that went neutral actually assisted in helping develop amendments to improve the language of the bill, and that was the council, and I was very grateful for them for that. However, one organization who said they were going to be neutral showed up the day of the hearing to testify, and they were anything but neutral. I won't play the whole thing here, but you can go on, and this will take you to the blog with more of the information. But the point is, for me, is that institutionalization is an experience. It is not about a building. If we focus on the building, we are completely missing the point of the experience of institutionalization. Segregation is a forced separation absent of choice. And I made the case that HCBS in Tennessee with ECF currently is institutional. And that is where we need to focus. Despite all of the heavy opposition, despite 2 days is all that I had to really figure out where I was even going to land or what this bill was about or who the players were and what the opposition was and all the different things. The bill did pass, and just this past week, it was signed into law. And I just want to say that the individuals you see here, the leaders like Lee Rose, I'm sorry, and Randy Elliott and this gentleman, they have such amazing hearts. This is not about money for them. There are so many other things they could have done with their money, with their time. This is a pure act of goodwill, of philanthropy, of trying to make the world a better place, of trying to fill a gap. This is disruptive innovation, right? And this is what we need more of. So I was honored to be able to support them in getting this over the finish line. And I really hope that other organizations will consider this, and hopefully we'll have a little easier, kind of calmer waters with our disability organizations in the future, so that we don't run off 501c3s that have funded themselves and want to bring in different options for people with IDD. So what are some of the last steps, or next steps, I should say? So for me, the big one, as you can tell throughout this, is combating modernized institutionalization and the segregation and isolation of individuals with profound intellectual disability, autism, and intense behavior symptoms. I'm focusing on crisis care, where we would like to increase the number of CIT trained police units, enhance and increase emergency room protocols, and also really work on adapting the treatment algorithms and some of the back end of best practices for emergency department providers, to help reduce diagnostic overshadowing and improve outcomes. Behavior discrimination. I feel this is something I'm going to be fighting until the day I die, but not all behaviors are a choice. Some behaviors are a symptom of disability. We are very well aware of this in special education through IDEA. If a student has a behavior symptom, maybe they flip a desk, maybe they injure a teacher, that student, if that student has an IEP, they can't just say, oh, you're no longer eligible, we don't have to teach you, you're just too much of a problem, go home, you can't, we're not going to teach you. No, they have to have a manifestation hearing. And what a manifestation hearing requires is that the onus is on the school to prove that that behavior was not a symptom of disability. If it was a symptom of disability, or they can't prove it and it is assumed to be a symptom of disability, then that student still has to have access to a free and appropriate public education. That might mean that the school has to bring in trainers to increase training and skill development with the staff. It might mean doing a new functional behavior assessment, developing a new behavioral intervention plan, adding in more equipment, whatever it might be. But the student is still eligible for a free and appropriate public education. Otherwise, it would be discrimination. They would be discriminating against that student due to their disability, okay? But when they turn 21 and they're no longer in school, well, 22 is when you can't, but that last year, now they're adults, they're out in the world. What they have access to is nothing but this HCBS waiver, so that they have access to their community. They can still develop skills and go to therapy, go to their doctors, go to Walmart, go shopping, go fishing if they want, be able to see friends, whatever it might be. Depends on that waiver, but no providers available, no training in behavior intervention, nothing. There is nothing set for this. It is solely, at best, ABA intermittently. They do not understand that this is a symptom of a disability, and it is overt discrimination, whether explicit or implicit. It is glaring that this is a clear form of discrimination against somebody for their disability, that the MCOs are not providing the adequate network, that there is no personal attendants that have to have the high level of behavior training that we still currently right now are doing on the old 1915 waivers. Those waivers, which are diminishing, right? That the population that has them is diminishing. Nobody's come in since 2016. They've added on to how they're training their DSPs over there. They now have an eBadge Academy, and you can go DSP level 1, 2, 3. And in DSV level 3, you have all this high level of behavior training and crisis intervention training. Nothing like that is still being done on the ECF choices side, which every single person who has come into the waiver since 2016 has. Why are we not including parity for behavior? So behavior discrimination is a huge issue for me. We did get including care necessary for physical safety into the autism cares markup. That was a huge win, and it does provide a little hope that we're making some progress. But we need to continue to enforce and enhance parity laws and really continue to raise awareness on biopsychosocial models that individuals are not just their behaviors, that it could be based on a myriad of biological issues. Maybe they are constipated, maybe they have a toothache, maybe they have a UTI. It could be that they have catatonia or some other kind of psychiatric issue occurring, or it could be social. It could be neither of those two. It could just be, staffing has changed, or maybe their shirt is rubbing them the wrong way. There's a lot of different things that can contribute to behaviors, and it's usually not one thing. There's a lot of things that pile on and combine. So sometimes there's a problem where you do find, hey, there's one problem here. We treat that and we think the behaviors are going to go away. Meanwhile, there were several contributing factors. That kind of awareness is something we need to continue to build. We need to build it into society. We need to build it into our schools. We need to build it into our providers' offices, into the hospitals, the first responders, until the world understands the biopsychosocial model and its necessity, then our work is not done. And finally, HCBS reform. As they continue to close more and more ICFs, we still clearly do not have HCBS that works. And so more and more states are going to end up like Tennessee if we don't have HCBS reform. We need to require a higher level of care to be included for complex medical and behavioral. These are not two separate silos. My daughter is not sometimes a human being with seizures and sometimes a human being with behaviors. She is always her. She has complex medical needs and intense behaviors, and she is one human being. So we do not need this siloed type care within HCBS. We need multidisciplinary care coordination. We need to enforce and enhance habilitation and meaningful daily activity, meaning that after you're 25, you still get ABA, PT, OT, speech, that these states aren't allowed to make these different caps and changes to the original CMS regulations that are now limiting or even prohibiting their access to these really important therapies that they need lifelong. Hold them to the integration mandate. That's what I keep asking. What is the pathway for my daughter to access her community? When she graduates high school, what is she going to do to access her community? How is she going to go to the grocery store? How is she going to go to the doctor's appointment? How is she going to develop relationships? How is she going to learn new skills? How is she going to feel like she has a meaningful place in our community? How? I don't have any answers. And of course, finally, enhancing family caregiver support, including pay. That has been an ongoing project that I've been working on. Just to end with this, that all of that disruption did cause a cultural shift in our state. The organization that was most opposed, the one that testified against the organizations in the hearing, they actually now have posted that they're going to be hosting the Forgotten Kids of IDEA, Tennessee Students with Behavior Needs webinar. So it just goes to show that they really are trying to kind of heal the rifts in the community and pay attention to the unmet needs. Family Voices Tennessee is an offshoot of that, and they have been very accommodating. We're having a lot of good collaborative conversations happening between them and the Tennessee chapter of NCSA. The Tennessee Council on Developmental Disabilities changed their partners curriculum to a life course framework. Remember, I told you I love frameworks. And then this is a quote from their Facebook page after they went through the Olmstead decision, and it's subtle, but it meant the world to me because it just in this language, it does say, hey, I hear you. We're not just out here celebrating that this is working for several thousand people in this state. We are hearing you that this isn't full inclusion yet, and there's still some work to be done. Because they say today we still argue about what those community services should look like. We question whether they are living up to the true vision or living up to the vision of true inclusion. And of course, there's a lot that great things that have come out of Olmstead, and thousands of people, like I said, are served really well. But we cannot use that as a reason to put blinders on and ignore the fact that many, many others are now living in this modernized institutionalization. It needs to be taken just as seriously as Clover Bottom, as Arlington Developmental Center, and all of the other things that we would like to believe we've gone away from. We really haven't. We've just shifted what the building looks like. The ideology has remained the same. You want to become a disruptor and a change maker, please feel free to join the National Grassroots Network. And there's my information to stay in touch. It's been really good seeing you. Thanks.